You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Coyote's Christmas Star by VLEK, performed by Otis Jiry. It was just a few days before Christmas when Coyote decided it was time to bring out all the fancy gewgaws, gadgets, and gizmos he used to decorate his tree every year. He hauled out the boxes and bags stuffed full of Christmas ornaments he'd gathered from all over who knows where, and set the boxes up all in a row. Then pulled off the lid on the first one but found it was empty inside. Not one bauble or bag, not one gadget or gizmo. So he ripped open all the boxes and found pretty much the same sorry situation. Every last one of them was empty. So Coyote started fussing and fuming until he turned red as a watermelon. You could almost see the steam rising off of that old yellow hide of his. So Coyote started thinking, who could have run off with those ornaments? It didn't take long for the jaybirds to come to mind. A jay will always go after something bright and shiny and pay no mind to who it belongs to. But on the other hand, it could have been raccoon, or even some of those human folks. So Coyote stewed and simmered and came up with a plan to get those ornaments back in time for Christmas. He waited until it got as cold and dark outside as he could stand it. Then he set out into the night to nose around a bit. He headed straight up to the jaybird's place and peeked in through a window. And what he saw was the whole jaybird clan decorating a big Christmas tree, and hanging off of that tree was a bunch of Coyote's ornaments. Now sure, Coyote could have just burst in right then and there, created a big fuss, and made those jays hand over his ornaments. But that's just not the Coyote way of handling things. So he settled down and waited for all the jaybirds to fall asleep. Then he crept into the house and looked around. What he saw was a bunch of blue tail feathers, all washed up and hanging on the fireplace to dry. Not many folks know that blue jays are so vain they never sleep in their tail feathers lest they get all bent out of shape. So Coyote grabbed up all the feathers and threw them in his sack, and then he raced off into the night without waking up a single jay. Then Coyote moved on further down the hill to where the old raccoon and his kin kept their den. When Coyote peered in the window, just like he figured, there was Raccoon and all his folk doing up a real fine Christmas tree. Real fine because it was covered all over with his instruments. "Well, now, isn't that a homey little scene?" Coyote muttered. Then, just like up at the jay's place, he settled down and waited for all of them to fall asleep. As soon as every last one of those raccoons was snoring, Coyote crept into the house and grabbed up all those little bandit masks they had hanging up to dry on the fireplace and stuffed every one of them into that sack of his. Then he bounded over to the other side of the valley where the human folks had built up a cabin. Coyote was sure those human folks had the rest of his ornaments, and of course they did. Those ornaments were right there, dangling off that tree of theirs, and even his big shiny star was sitting proud as you please, way up on the very top. By then the whole family of human folks was under the covers and already snoring, so he slipped in without a sound and made off with every last one of their pairs of nice, shiny wings. That's right, their wings. Back in those days, each and every one of the human folk had a fine pair of wings. That's how it was until they messed with Coyote, and he snatched every last one of them off the fireplace where they were hanging up to dry and stuffed them into his sack. Then Coyote hightailed it back to his place and finished decorating his own tree with all the jaybird feathers, and it didn't look too bad. Then he strung up the raccoon masks end to end like a garland, and set off the top of the whole tree with a fine pair of shiny wings. Finally, Coyote stood back and admired his handiwork, thinking he'd done a right fine job. Then he curled up in front of the fireplace and went to sleep with a big grin on his face. The next morning, Coyote woke up to an awful lot of squawking and racket out front. So he jumped up out of bed and threw open the door and found all the jays standing there looking up at him. Mr. Coyote, sir," said the big jay, head of the clan. "We reckon we had it coming for making off with your ornaments, but we need those feathers back real bad. Can't we strike a deal?" And with that, the jays brought out all of Coyote's ornaments and handed them over without fuss or fanfare. I didn't really like those feathers much anyway. They hardly showed up at all in the tree. "All right, I'll trade you back. Besides, you boys look pretty funny standing there naked as jaybirds." "But then you are jaybirds," howled Coyote, giddy as a school kid to get his ornaments back in time for Christmas. The jays stormed out hopping mad, but glad to get what they'd come for. So Coyote spent the rest of the afternoon putting every gadget and gizmo in its rightful place on the tree. Along around sunset there came a quiet little knock at the front door. Coyote glanced up with a smirk and a snort, figuring he knew who was standing on the other side of that door. So he went over and slowly pulled it open, and glared down at the little gray form of Old Man Raccoon himself, standing there with a sack in his hands. Well, now, who's this?" asked Coyote. "Can it be Old Raccoon?" "Nah, can't be, without that fine mask he's always wearing. What brings you down to my place on an afternoon like this, being so close to Christmas and all? I think you'd be busy up at your place decorating." Coyote was enjoying the sight of Raccoon fiddling with the sack in his hands and staring real hard at the floor beneath his feet. Well, Coyote, see, I was thinking," Raccoon muttered and hem-hawed, making absolutely no sense. "Speak up, Raccoon, what were you thinking?" asked Coyote, puffing up bigger and taller and more menacing than usual. Well, Coyote, we all make mistakes now and then, and a few weeks back I do and freely admit I made off with some of your ornaments, and I just don't feel right about it," Raccoon stammered while rubbing his face where his fine black mask used to be. "I see," said Coyote, pretending to sound real concerned. "So it was your conscience that got the best of you, was it? No burning sting of loss of your own, maybe? Well, that's all fine and dandy. You give me back my ornaments, and I'll hand over these raccoon masks in exchange." Coyote grinned as he dangled the masks in Raccoon's face. Raccoon dropped that sack he was carrying and grabbed the masks from Coyote's hand and dashed off faster than he'd ever run in his whole life. Coyote just stood there bent over double, roaring with laughter. Then he remembered his big Christmas star high atop the human folks' tree. So he settled down to wait for them to show up. He waited, and he waited. And finally Christmas came and went that year, and no human folks ever showed up at Coyote's door to trade back his Christmas star for their fine, shiny wings. The last anybody heard, and it wasn't that long ago, Coyote was still waiting for those human folk to show up and return his ornaments so they could get their own wings back. And that's why, to this very day, human folks have to walk around on two legs, and you never see them fly. Well, not ever except in airplanes. And every year, come Christmas, Coyote decorates that tree of his and puts the bright human folks' wings high up on the very tip-top. Who knows? Maybe the human folks need Coyote's ornaments more than they need their own wings. Coyote doesn't mind, though. He's keeping them safe and tucked away most of the year, and they look pretty nice on top of that tree of his. But if folks ever decide they need their wings back, well, they know where to find old Coyote.